Okay, so here's our start point, the National Trust shop in Rhossil. Hi, so I'm Helen. Nice to meet you all. So I've been asked to take you on a walk with me from Rhossil National Trust shop. So I've just showed you that on the film. And we're going to walk out to the Coast Guard's point out on the headland. So I don't know if you can see behind me the great sweep of Rhossil Bay. Can you see that? We're going to start there, and then I'm going to take you to some really interesting points in the landscape. Now, generally I lead walks that draw in a lot of the history and heritage of the area, but of course that invariably includes everything, because the landscape and the story of our landscape, so many things are tied up in developing what really is that understanding of a sense of place. So there we have it, a great expanse of sand with Rhossil Downs behind it. Now, the old Rhossil village actually used to be right down near the the top of the sandy part of the beach. The tide's really high today. It was called the Warren. It was an old medieval village. We spotted it there because bones were seen poking out of the sand. So there was an excavation and many burial sites were discovered, and the old church of Rhossil. Absolutely fascinating. And I don't know if you can see just poking out the wreck of the Helvetia. It was wrecked in the 1800s and it was carrying timber. Lots of ghost stories as well associated with the beach. Don't know if you can see the rectory in the distance. Now that's said to be haunted by a couple who come down the stairs and are said to have been dressed in Victorian clothing and to have skin grey like elephant hide. Imagine how terrifying that would be. Now there's another really interesting story about a man called Charles Bevan. He was said to have discovered gold on the beach, possibly from the wreck of the Dollar ship, famous shipwreck on the Gower coastline. And he's said to have taken his trousers off, tied them at the ends, filled them with gold, slung them over his shoulder and disappeared. He's now said to haunt these sands on a coach and horses. Okay, so I'm heading out now to the main path. It's pretty straight out to the Coast Guard point. You can just see the Wern's Head in the distance. Wern coming from the Viking word meaning dragon or serpent. So we keep walking until our next stop, which is an Iron Age promontory fort. Okay, so we're approaching Castle Camp Iron Age promontory fort. Gower's it was quite prolific in terms of hill forts. It's got over 30, and of course promontory hill forts were strategically very useful because you could survey intruders, invaders. They were defensive points, certainly. They were also great statements of power and control. If we look out at the view. But they were also on Gower settlement points. Now, not everyone lived within the enclosures. The enclosures themselves, characterised by great ditches, which are just coming into view. So these great banks would have been protected against the weather and also marauding tribes. Now the Iron Age tribes in South Wales are called the Silures. A very ferocious group. We call them Silures. The Romans actually called them Silures, or Caesar to be precise. I'll just take you inside so you can get a sense of the ditches. Now before we had the Coast Guard and the lifeboat on these coastlines, we had something called the rocket. So throughout lines, really, ropes into the teeth of gales and storms to rescue poor soldiers. Kitchen Corner out in Rhossil was a particularly difficult point there's a great anchor there from a shipwreck. Sadly, the shipwreck that it's from, nobody actually died on the shipwreck, but they did die trying to retrieve the anchor. That's the part of the old rocket. There, look. You can see little reminders in the landscape. And then just behind, look, one of the great ditches. Great fun with kids. Great fun with grown-ups too. Nice place to have picnics out of the wind. So as we leave the hill fort, we get a cracking view of the Wherm. Always good to remind people that you need to check the tides if you want to go right out. Famously, Dylan Thomas, he camped out overnight, wrote a poem about Wyrm's Head, said to have been frantic to come back because he'd left Caitlin on the beach with some handsome young friend, and he was a very jealous sort of character. Look at that. Definitely worth an adventure. Now, interestingly, they used to graze sheep out on the Wherm. The grass was said to have been particularly sweet, and oh, look at that. Now I'm straying from the path a lot, but this gravel track will effectively, if you stay on it, take you most of the way. And then as you follow these stone walls, now these stone walls were built with a kind of lip over the top, so they're particular to Gower, and they were to stop the sheep from jumping over. There's actually nobody alive on Gower anymore that can build walls in this style. So you can see the gravel track twists around. So if you were to follow it all the way around, it would eventually sort of peter out amongst the gorse and take you towards Fall Bay. But if we carry on along this marvellous green strip, you just see the Coast Guard hut coming into view. Now, because Gower is made of this limestone cliffs, so it's very soft, which means we've got a lot of bone caves on Gower. And if we went past Fall Bay and kept going towards Pilton Green, there's a cave called Pavilion Cave, and in there they found the body of a young man. Initially they thought it was a Roman prostitute because of the hill fort that was above it, Yellow Top, but it was actually the body of a 36,000-year-old male hunter, laid out ceremonially with possibly the mammoth that he was trying to kill, or that killed him, near where his head was, and covered in red ochre, so buried ritually. Now, Goat Hole, where they found him, was probably a seasonal hunting place, and Gower's landscape would have been a kind of open plain, small river valleys, and the weather would actually, in between the ice ages, the mini ice age, would have been quite pleasant and warm, and the sea would have been a long way out. Absolutely fascinating history if you consider that hunter is so important in terms of the world history. If you like, you could call him the first sort of modern European, although of course that has to be in relative terms. So here we are, look, Coast Guard. This is where you can find out all the information about how to cross out onto the Wherm. They have Coast Guards stationed here, and they are extremely helpful. So any questions, they're always happy to answer. I'm very grateful to these volunteers to give up their time and who gather so much local knowledge. So here it is, Journey's End. there are the times. We are like, you can follow these people going down to the access point to the worm. Really high tide, so can't get across today. The Devil's Causeway is completely covered with water. And here's the front of the building. Now we've left the Coast Guard hut, and I always like to do this slight little variation on the route because you can see the medieval farming strips over there called the Vial. They're very precious in terms of conservation and also very particular to the area. You can see those strips just ahead. And we can follow this grassy path, and just as it curves around at the end, it follows the stone wall all the way back, and then you join up with that gravel path again and get straight back to the National Trust shop. So I'm going to walk along here just to show you the point at which it turns. So as I said earlier, I'm now heading towards Fall Bay, at which point I'm actually going to run back to Portainen. Now that's a long walk, and there's a lot of interesting things on that particular journey too. What a beautiful day. I think walking like this, just pointing things out, letting the walkers experience the landscape themselves. So not too much information, I think, just those little pointers, just that sense of time passing. So I left the Coast Guard hut, walked along this grassy track here, and then I'm going to go along here and then follow the wall straight ahead, which takes us back to that gravel track and back to the National Trust shop. Excellent views to the left over to Llanganeth, and then a nice, well-deserved cup of tea. So I'm going to make you feel dizzy now. I'm going to turn the camera around. I'm going to bid you all farewell. I'm actually going to run back in that direction. So I've already had my cup of tea. It's cheated really, isn't it? I'm going to run back to Portainen, and I'm going to have another cup of tea and a big bag of chips. Hope you enjoyed this little video. Really enjoyed it. Shame we couldn't all meet in person, but there's always another time. Bye!